If you've ever listened to a piece of music before, it's most likely been packaged in a number of ways. Firstly, there are single songs, or simply singles, which, as the name suggests, is just that one song you're currently listening to. Nothing exists before or after said single song, as it's a single. You get it. There are also extended plays, or EPs, which are usually a collection of around 3 to 6 tracks, coming to an average runtime between 15 and 30 minutes. And then there are long plays, or LPs, which are most commonly referred to in today's language as albums. A collection of usually 8 to 15 songs that can also have a runtime of about 30 to 80 minutes on average. But in the modern day of digital streaming, shorter attention spans, and an increasingly saturated music industry where anybody that has access to a computer with a DAW installed can freely upload their homemade music onto the internet for everyone and anyone to find and enjoy, why then are artists choosing to package their musical projects into albums? I mean, if you think about it, it would be so much easier, quicker, and more beneficial for the artist to just release single songs or shorter EPs rather than the longer album format. Not only will the time between each of your releases be shorter so you stay relevant in search engines for longer, but a lot of the streaming sites like Spotify now rely heavily on curated playlists consisting of multiple single songs based on popularity and total stream numbers. The looming hand of SEOs, digital algorithms, and changing listening habits of today's average music listener might just be the tip of the iceberg as to why more and more artists prioritize shorter musical projects rather than full-length albums. So the question then needs to be asked, what's the point of albums in music? Let's get one thing straight before we move on here. I personally am and will always be an album listener. But in saying that, I don't ever want to discourage or shame anyone if they prefer to just listen to singles or playlists when consuming music. It completely makes sense after all, especially considering the modern music listening landscape. And I'd be lying if I said I also didn't enjoy bumping a curated Spotify playlist like everybody else from time to time. After all, there's only so many house parties I can attend where I can play the full Death Consciousness album on the speaker from start to finish and still be invited back for the next party. But one thing I have noticed as a longtime music fan is that this idea of listening to a full album from start to finish is becoming less and less of a norm. I have a bunch of friends who struggle to listen to new artists at all, unless they happen to have a radio hit or heard their song from a famous TV show or movie or meme format, or unless they're given a particular short list of songs to listen to from a pre-existing fan of said artists. I've definitely been guilty of that last one. But no matter how big of a smash hit a single song may become, we've seen time and time again that in the long run, the best artists in the world are renowned for their particular album-based works. And that's simply because the album format in music has qualities that you just can't replicate in a single or EP format. One of the most fundamental reasons, I think, has to do with the fact that an album is a musician's complete artistic statement. Most albums, if done well, have some sort of structure, theme, or concept worked into it. These can be loosely woven themes that anybody with any level of functional empathy can relate to, like love, hate, life, and death, reaching all the way up to super deep concepts that can be approached from any multiple angle or perspective in open-ended ways, like an entire concept album that follows a narrative, cast of characters, and even a fantastical world like what you would experience in a book or a movie. Unlike a single or an EP, in albums, these themes can be explored far more in depth and lets the listener sink into said themes at a much deeper level of understanding. Technically, there's nothing stopping you from listening listening to Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 by Pink Floyd and say, oh wow, this is a catchy song with some funny lyrical ideas and a sick guitar solo at the end. But you can also instead choose to listen to the same song in the order that it appears on the Wall album and go, oh, well, this song is actually kind of depressing and meaningful now. And I understand that some may argue that by doing that, it can potentially, quote unquote, ruin a song. But I say, hey, blame the artist, not the genius annotation. Albums can also give a detailed description of the artist's current state of mind in powerful, vivid, or imaginative ways. Mount Erie's 2017 album A Crow Looked at Me is a haunting example. Using an extremely minimalist, skeletal, and depressing soundscape, the artist recounts the last few months he spent with his wife as he watches her pass away from terminal cancer. Although each of the individual tracks lay out these emotions of grief and sadness in different gut-punching ways, it's the act of following the entire album, and in turn the story, chronologically from start to finish, that gives you the full, devastating picture the artist is trying to portray to the listener. Oh, and fair warning before you jump into this album if you're curious, this one really messed me up. Of course, not all themes and concepts are depressing in the world of albums. 2004's Food by Masked MC MF Doom is an album whose entire concept revolves around these food-related themes and uses clever double entendres to relate food to things like feuds in the rap community, the commercialization of shallow music in hip-hop, and even the importance of friendship. Doom himself described it as a concept album, quote, about the things you find on a picnic or at a picnic table, end quote. However you want to interpret that description is entirely up to you. Albums also allow artists to change up and experiment with certain sounds, styles, or even entire genres. A classic example of this is the Australian band King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, who, although are primarily lumped into the garage rock and psychedelic rock genres, have also been known to dabble in genres like dream pop, progressive rock, boogie and roots rock, thrash metal, and even acid techno. What would otherwise seem like a strange detour for a collection of singles feels a lot more cohesive when there's an entire array of tracks to accompany the experimentation, giving fans of the artist more of a complete experience in a potential new venture for the artist. Of course, sometimes it doesn't quite land and is always a creative risk on the artist's part, but when it hits, you'll be wishing that they continue to go down that route for longer. Another aspect of the power of albums that I think gets overlooked a lot is its nostalgic power. If you're anywhere around my age, specifically between the ages of 25 and 35, I'm sure that one look at any of these album covers will give you a strong sense of nostalgia in one way or another. It could be years, even decades since you last listened to an album from your youth, but I like to think that the amount of nostalgia it gives someone is far more powerful than any kind of single or EP, especially if you grew up buying CDs like I did. Although you might be quicker to remember one-hit wonders from your youth more than any singular album, I would argue that the nostalgia that entire albums give is far more personal to you and was probably material that helped shape you as a person back then. But it's not just about esoteric concepts like themes or nostalgia. Albums also make physical impacts in the real world for artists and non-artists. Think of some of the most groundbreaking and evolutionary moments in music history. Nirvana's Nevermind, blurring the lines between pop appeal and the DIY mentality of the grunge movement. Public Enemy's It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, often being credited as one of the first conscious hip-hop albums that discuss sensitive topics about the black community in a brutal and truthful manner. Kraftwerk's Autobahn being the direct inspiration for practically every electronic song created after it. There's certainly more examples out there that I'm sure you and I can think of, but have you noticed that these are all full-length albums? Musicians and music enthusiasts understand the power of an album in its exploration of themes, concepts, and styles, and thus are more likely to take inspiration from projects like this rather than any singular song. It makes a musical statement made by an artist that much more impactful when it's more than a couple of individual unconnected songs. Now, up until this point, it might sound like the idea of singles and even EPs are quote-unquote ruining the reputation and sanctity of musical expression, but it's Far from it. Not only are singles and EPs a great entryway for anyone to get into a new artist, but it also gives pre-existing listeners a nice teaser for potential future material that the artist might be cooking up. EPs also allow artists to get way more crazy and experimental without risking low album sales, which make or break the reputation of a lot of artists, especially those under major labels where performance is the end-all be-all for better or worse. If you've never given EPs a try, I highly encourage you to do so. Here's just a few EPs on screen that I personally love going back to time and time again, and I'm sure you'll hear me spew my love on these projects in one way or another in future videos. Of course, singles also have a ton of benefits for the artists too. They're powerful pieces of advertisement for the artist to bring in new fans in the form of radio plays, music videos, and more recently streaming services and playlist fodder. It's also a great way to promote a future album, as most singles are just a song taken out of said album, with some exceptions of course. Plus, it's usually the easiest way for newer artists to achieve chart success, and a gateway for a lot of potentially interesting collaborations between different artists. In general, singles and EPs are important, but albums are the real backbone for any musical artist. And I feel that, again, as every year passes, I'm seeing less and less people listening to complete albums from start to finish, which I think is just a bit of a shame. Not only are there still a ton of artists whose entire catalogs revolve around things like concept albums, which again can only really be enjoyed in an album playthrough setting, but you as a music listener can miss out on some potentially fantastic music that you never knew existed. I remember I begged my friend who loves Nujabes to sit down and listen to the Metaphorical Music album from start to finish after I heard that he just listens to the more popular singular songs in his catalog, and afterwards ended up falling in love with most of the non-single tracks on that album instead. Listening to an album all the way through is truly a unique experience and will definitely change the way you listen to music in what I think is the best way possible. Of course, this is just a suggestion, not a demand. At the end of the day, your music listening journey is entirely personal, and you can listen to music however you like. I'm not your dad. But you never know, your next favorite song might be that one deep cut in an album you've been avoiding to listen to for all those years.